Dale Hosmer had been walking riverbank for Pawnee County since 1944, and by August of 1952, he could read the Arkansas the way a man reads a face he has known for years. The river tells you things when it drops. It shows you gravel bars the current keeps buried in wet years, old snags and fence posts from fields the channel cut through decades back, the occasional clay pipe or wagon iron from a farmstead that slid into a flood and traveled miles before the river put it down. He had seen most of what the Arkansas carried in its bottom, or thought he had, until the morning of August 14, 1952, when he walked the eastern bank south of the State Highway 56, crossing outside Larned, and found something the river had not shown him before. The summer of 1952 was the third straight year of drought across central Kansas. The Arkansas had dropped to levels the gauge at Larned had not recorded since before the valley's irrigation canal system was first dug, running so thin in some stretches that the gravel mid-channel sat exposed in the afternoon heat. The valley floor was a pale, cracked expanse in August of that year, bleached gravel and dried mud, and the flat remains of the water vegetation that had grown up from the shallows the previous spring, and now lay pressed down under a sun that had not given the region a measurable inch of rain in 11 weeks. Hosmer was out that morning to inspect a county irrigation headgate the low water had exposed for the first time in at least a decade. He found the headgate in adequate condition. What he found 60 yards south of it had no adequate explanation. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button, drop a comment, telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The exposed riverbed at the southern end of the headgate section ran for perhaps 200 yards of bare gravel and pale silty hardpan, before the remaining current reasserted itself against the far bank. Hosmer walked it as he would walk any exposed section, scanning for drift, erosion damage, anything the county might need to record before the next rain. The ground underfoot was firm, dried to a light crust in the places the silt lay thickest. Roughly 100 feet out from the bank's tree line, where that silt was deepest and had cracked in the heat into the hexagonal pattern that river clay makes when it dries, the top courses of a stone wall broke the surface, not scattered rubble carried in from somewhere upstream, not a single displaced course from a structure that had slid into the current, 4 full courses of dressed limestone, rising to just above knee height on 3 continuous sides of what was plainly a rectangular enclosure, with the 4th side still submerged under the last braid of the channel where the water ran shallowest. He stopped and looked at it for what he would later describe to the county engineer as a considerable while, before he stepped closer. The stone was dressed, not fieldstone pulled from a creek bed and stacked. The faces were flat and planed, the surfaces worked to a consistency that fieldstone never holds. The corners were squared to a tolerance that careful work produces and careless work cannot. Each course fitted to the one below it, without visible mortar, the joints running so tight that Hosmer pressed the blade of his pocket knife against several of them in succession and found no purchase for the steel anywhere along the length he could reach. He recorded that in his field notebook that evening in those exact terms. He walked the full perimeter of the 3 exposed sides, and the construction at the base was the same as at the top, fitted without mortar, plumb, the individual blocks cut to dimensions that matched their neighbors without shims or wedging of any kind. 3 sides of the enclosure were exposed enough to measure with the steel tape he carried. The exterior ran 31 feet on the long axis and 19 feet on the short. His compass showed those 2 axes as running within a degree of true magnetic north and south. Not oriented to the township survey grid, the system of section lines that governed the placement of every farmstead, road, and fence line in Pawnee County, magnetic north and the Kansas survey grid are not the same direction. The angular difference between them in this part of the state runs to roughly 9 degrees, enough that any builder working from a survey stake in the settlement era would produce a structure rotated noticeably from the orientation of what Hosmer was measuring. A farmstead foundation from the settlement era of this stretch of valley, the 1880s and 1890s, when the Arkansas corridor was first broken for cultivation, is built in a predictable way. Fieldstone or local limestone laid in lime mortar, corners rough-fitted, dimensions governed by the lumber a man could haul and the rooms a family required. The orientation follows the survey grid, because the survey grid was the legal fact of the land, the invisible geometry that told every farmer in Pawnee County where his property ended and his neighbors began. The enclosure Hosmer was measuring followed none of those conventions. The stone was dressed at a standard no settlement-era farmstead builder was paid to reach. The mortar was absent entirely. The orientation ignored the survey grid as though it had been set before that grid was drawn, or by someone who had no knowledge that the grid existed. The silt line told the same story in different terms. On the exterior face of the exposed courses, where the stonework disappeared back into the riverbed, a pale discoloration marked the level the riverbed ordinarily sat at in non-drought conditions. That line ran 18 inches above the top of the uppermost exposed course, 18 inches above the highest visible point of the wall. The top of this structure sat 18 inches below the ordinary surface of the Arkansas riverbed, fully buried under river silt when the water held at its normal level, not visible from the surface, not accessible without a drought of the depth of 1952, pulling the water level low enough to expose the upper edge of the stonework. Whatever the enclosure was, the river's ordinary behavior was to cover it entirely. It had been covered that way for longer than the silt depth could make simple. He made 2 pages of notes in the Greenfield notebook the county road department issued to its inspection staff. Dimensions, stone type, joint quality, silt depth as far as he could probe with what he was carrying, compass bearing, and the location relative to the head gate and the State Highway 56 crossing. He did not speculate in the notes, because interpretation was not what the notebook was for. He drove back to Larned that afternoon and reported what he had found to the county engineer before he had filed the formal inspection summary, which was not his standard procedure. And Hosmer was not the kind of man who varied from standard procedure without reason. The county engineer for Pawnee County in 1952 was a man named Orville Patten, who had held the position since 1938 and who Hosmer described, in a letter he wrote years later, as a man who did not spend time on things that did not need doing. Patten heard the report, asked 2 questions about the stone type and the silt line, and told Hosmer to meet him at the site the following morning. They were there by 8 o'clock on August 15th. Patten brought a measuring tape, a hand level, and a compass. He and Hosmer checked the long axis together and found it accurate to within an inch. Patten ran his own compass bearing and got the same result, within a degree of magnetic north, not the survey grid. The county engineer's office maintained a daily inspection log, a bound ledger kept without interruption across Patten's entire tenure. That log survives in partial form at the Pawnee County Historical Archive, and the entry for August 15, 1952, lists the riverside inspection as one of 3 jobs completed that day. The notation beside the entry reads, in the surviving copy, as follows: foundation, cut stone, orientation anomalous, silt depth indicates extended submersion. Referred to state, 3 lines. The log continues without interruption the following day with an entry about culvert repair on a county road north of Larned. There is no follow-up entry for the foundation anywhere in the remaining pages of the log for that calendar year. The state referral Patten recorded left a paper trace in one place only. A letter preserved in the personal professional papers of a Kansas Geological Survey geologist named Raymond Aldrich, received in September of 1952 from the director of the state's Historical Resources Office, directed him to carry out a preliminary field assessment of a site in the Arkansas River drainage south of Larned, flagged by Pawnee County. The letter gave coordinates derived from Hosmer's field notebook and specified a written report to be returned to the director's office within 60 days of receipt. Aldrich had been with the Kansas Geological Survey since 1946, had conducted field assessments in every county of the South Central District, and held a graduate degree in geology from the University of Kansas. He was not a man the survey sent out on low-priority calls. His copy of the director's letter carries, in pencil, in the upper right margin, in his own hand, the word checked and a date, October 9, 1952. No report attributed to Raymond Aldrich in response to that letter exists in the Kansas Geological Survey's archive, in the State Historical Resources Office records, or in the collection of Aldrich's own papers held at the Wichita State University Library since his death in 1978. His field journals for 1952 survive in that collection and are complete for the full calendar year with a single exception. The journals were maintained in a consistent hand in small bound notebooks, with an entry for every working day Aldrich spent in the field, including weekends when survey work required it. The entry for October 8th records a standard site inspection in Reno County. The entry for October 10th records travel and desk work from the survey's Wichita office. Between those two entries, where October 9th should appear, there is a blank page. The binding shows no sign of pages removed. The blank is not an oversight. Aldrich did not skip pages anywhere else in the journal. The blank page on October 9th is the entirety of what Raymond Aldrich left on the record about what he found when he drove out to the bank of the Arkansas south of Larned to complete the assessment the state had sent him to make. Whatever Aldrich found on the riverbank that October morning, he drove back from it and wrote nothing down in a journal he had otherwise never failed to complete. That absence is the document. An experienced field geologist drove out to a specific location with a specific professional obligation and returned without producing any record of any kind, not a note to himself, not a draft paragraph, not a word in a letter to any colleague. The penciled word on his copy of the director's letter is the only evidence that he went out there at all. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The water came back before the 60-day window on Aldrich's report had closed, and it did not come back gradually. The mechanism is documented in the Bureau of Reclamation's operations log for John Martin Reservoir in Bent County, Colorado, 170 miles upstream. The reservoir, which had been controlling the upper Arkansas's flow into Kansas since its completion in 1943, made a scheduled end-of-season release in October to honor downstream irrigation commitments. That release is entered in the Bureau's log with dates and flow figures that are not in dispute. What those records show is that the release crested the Larned gauge on October 11th, 2 days after Aldrich's blank journal page, and the water came up across the previously dry riverbed at a rate consistent with a controlled upstream release rather than a rainfall event. The exposed gravel south of the State Highway 56 crossing was underwater within 48 hours. The county head gate Hosmer had inspected in August was resubmerged before the week ended. Everything the river had put on dry land that summer went back under. This is the sequence the surviving paper allows. Hosmer finds the structure on August 14th. Patten confirms it on August 15th and refers it to the state the same day. Aldrich reaches the site on October 9th. His entry for that date is blank. The river covers the site on October 11th. No report from Aldrich reaches any archive. No follow-up entry appears in Patten's log. The State Historical Resources Office, reorganized and renamed several times in the decades since, holds no file on the Pawnee County referral beyond the outgoing letter to Aldrich. 62 years after those events, a researcher named Meredith Crane was compiling a history of Bureau of Reclamation water management in the Arkansas Valley when she moved through a box of County Road Department materials donated to the Pawnee County Museum in 2001. She found 3 other Greenfield notebooks in the box alongside Hosmer's, each from a different inspector and a different year, the ordinary accumulation of a department that kept field records as a matter of procedure rather than expectation. She recognized Hosmer's name from other county records she had already worked through, opened his notebook, found the August 14th entry, and understood from the combination of stone type, compass bearing, and silt line depth, with no follow-up notation indicating a conventional resolution, that what she was reading had not been adequately accounted for in its own time. She cross-referenced the location against the county engineer's log, found Patten's 3-line entry, and spent the better part of 2 years tracing the referral chain that entry pointed toward. She located Aldrich's papers at Wichita State, confirmed the blank journal page, and then contacted the Kansas Historical Society, the successor organization to the Historical Resources Office, and the Kansas Geological Survey's own archive in Lawrence. None of them held a file on the Pawnee County referral beyond the outgoing letter. In 2015, Crane published a 4-page piece in a regional journal of historical geography, noting the notebook, the referral entry, and the blank journal page, and raising the question of what the structure Hosmer described might have been. The piece received 2 citations in subsequent academic literature. Both appeared as footnotes in papers addressing historical drought records on the Arkansas River. Neither paper addressed the structure. Raymond Aldrich spent 2 more years with the Kansas Geological Survey after October of 1952, before transferring to the State Water Resources Board, where he worked on reservoir planning until his retirement in 1969. His published papers in the years following addressed Cretaceous chalk formations in the western part of the state and sedimentation rates in the Smoky Hill River drainage. He never published anything on pre-settlement stone construction in the Arkansas Valley and never gave any recorded public statement on the October referral. His papers at Wichita State contain no draft report, no field notes from a site visit, and no correspondence about the Pawnee County Foundation with any colleague. He died in 1978. The blank page is the entirety of what he left on the record about what he found. Hosmer's find was not the only time dressed stone had emerged from the Arkansas riverbed during a low water period in the decades before 1952. The record of those earlier appearances is a scatter of isolated notations across county archives and surveyors' correspondence, not a literature, and it carries none of the systematic documentation a literature would require. A county surveyor named Willis Pruitt, conducting a low-water survey near Kinsley in Edwards County, 40 miles downstream from Larned, in the drought summer of 1934, noted in his field records the presence of dressed limestone blocks in an exposed section of the riverbed. His notes describe the stone as cut rather than broken, the joints as tight, and the silt depth as exceeding the reach of his measuring equipment. The county records contain a single letter from Pruitt to the commission recommending that the site be documented for future investigation when conditions permitted. The commission minutes contain no response. No follow-up correspondence from any party exists in the Edwards County Archive referencing the site. 3 years before Pruitt's find, in the summer of 1931, a state highway department grading crew cutting a new roadbed along the south bank of the Arkansas near Ellenwood in Barton County broke through a layer of compacted silt and exposed what the foreman's incident report describes as a stone floor, flat-dressed blocks fitted without bonding material, at a depth of 4 feet below the original surface grade. The foreman halted the crew and reported up the administrative chain. According to a note he made on his personal copy of the filed report, he received instructions from a district supervisor to resume grading and to omit the stone floor from the filed survey documentation. The highway was built on schedule. The roadbed covers that section of the survey corridor today. What all 3 finds share is not only the material and the construction standard, though both of those are consistent across the sites. The quality they share most plainly is the silt. Each was found beneath a depth of river-deposited alluvial material that the men who found it could not account for within any timeline of post-contact settlement. Dressed limestone fitted without mortar to tolerances a knife blade cannot enter does not belong to the settlement era in this part of Kansas, and the settlement era's own record is well enough preserved in county archives to confirm that absence. The earliest Anglo-American settlement of this stretch of the Arkansas dates to the 1860s and 1870s, and its construction methods are documented in county records without gap. Nothing in that record produces what Hosmer's notebook describes. None of it ends up under 4 feet of undisturbed river silt. The geological character of the central Arkansas Valley places that silt in a specific context. The valley is a product of Pleistocene meltwater, the period when glacial outflow from the Rocky Mountain front loaded the river with suspended material and built the wide, flat-bottomed channel the Arkansas still occupies. Silt accumulation has been continuous since that period, laid down in thin annual layers across the valley floor. Accumulation rates for alluvial valleys of this character in the southern plains run to roughly 1 inch of deposition per decade under average flow conditions. 18 inches of continuous, undisturbed silt above the top course of a buried wall. At that rate, amounts to approximately 180 years of accumulation. 4 feet of undisturbed silt above a stone floor amounts to roughly 5 centuries. These figures are approximate, and local variation can produce different results depending on channel position and flood history. But the direction the numbers point does not change based on whether the local rate is twice as fast or half as slow. The structures were not placed in the river's path during the settlement era. The river's own sediment record cannot be made to say otherwise. The stone Hosmer pressed his pocket knife against in the summer of 1952 was worked and fitted by hands that were not breaking ground for Kansas homesteads in the 1880s. The silt above it is the record of the time between those hands and his. That time was not short. The Arkansas south of the State Highway 56, crossing outside Larned, is covered today by the river in all ordinary years. The current drought period affecting the southern plains has brought the Arkansas in central Kansas to levels not recorded in county gauge data since the early 1950s, and stretches of exposed gravel south of Larned have appeared in recent seasons that county residents have not seen dry in their working lives. Whether the silt above the foundation has shifted in the 7 decades since Hosmer knelt down and pressed a blade against the joints, whether the exposed courses remain intact, or the river has moved material across them in the intervening years, no one with the equipment or the authorization to find out has gone out to look. No radiometric dating program has been directed at this section of the Arkansas riverbed. No ground-penetrating survey has been filed for the relevant stretch south of the highway crossing. No bore samples have been taken from the silt surrounding the site. The Bureau of Reclamation's operational records for John Martin Reservoir show the October 1952 release exactly as it was entered in the log, and those records contain no mention of Larned, Pawnee County, or any communication from a Kansas state agency about the timing of that release. Hosmer's field notebook is in the Pawnee County Museum in a flat archival box, properly sleeved and catalogued since Meredith Crane donated her research files in 2014. The green cover is faded but intact. The August 14th entry fills 2 full pages in a clear hand. It sits in the same box as 3 other inspection notebooks from the same period, the kind of document that county collections accumulate by the case without expecting that any single one will turn out to matter. This one matters because the man who filled it walked out onto a dry riverbed one August morning and found something that a county engineer confirmed, that a state geologist drove out to assess, and that a reservoir release covered back up within 48 hours of that assessment. The notebook is the only record of the structure that has not since disappeared from the archive. Dale Hosmer drove back to Larned on the evening of August 14, 1952, and told Orville Patten what the river had set on dry ground for him to find. Patten drove out the next morning and confirmed it in 3 lines of notation. Raymond Aldrich drove out in October and left a blank page in a journal that otherwise had no blank pages. The water came up 2 days after Aldrich's visit, and the site went back under. What the Arkansas had revealed in that window, dressed limestone fitted without mortar to tolerances no settlement-era builder in Pawnee County was working to, oriented to a geometry that predated the survey grid laid over it after the 1860s, buried under river silt that no local accumulation rate places in any century a Kansas county record has ever named, remains where Hosmer found it. Covered by the same river that kept it hidden until the water dropped far enough for a man with a pocket knife and a green field notebook to walk out and take its measure. The river will show it again when the water falls far enough. The water is falling now. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.